The first sign that something was wrong came when I looked out across my ranch and saw 3 black trucks rolling through my front gate. Dust billowed behind them as they crossed the gravel road toward my bull pasture. My stomach tightened instantly. Nobody came onto my property without permission, and certainly not with a convoy. I stepped onto my porch and recognized the woman climbing out of the lead truck. The HOA President. She adjusted her sunglasses and pointed toward my pasture as if she already owned the land. Behind her, several contractors unloaded equipment and began walking toward the fence line. "What do you think you're doing?" I shouted as I headed their way. She didn't even look concerned. "I'm removing that bull today," she said confidently. "Whether you like it or not." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "That bull is private property," I replied. "And this ranch isn't part of your HOA." She smirked. Not for much longer. At that moment, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Titan, my 2,000-pound breeding bull, was staring directly at the group. He wasn't grazing anymore. He wasn't moving. He was watching. The contractors slowed their steps. One of them looked nervous. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I don't think we should be this close." The HOA President ignored him and continued marching toward the enclosure. Titan lowered his massive head. His front hoof dug into the dirt. Once. Then twice. I raised my voice one final time. "Get away from that fence right now." Nobody listened. And less than a minute later, everything went horribly wrong. My name is Jack Turner, and for most of my life, this ranch has been my entire world. The land had belonged to my family for nearly 70 years. My grandfather bought it when the area was nothing but open fields and dirt roads. My father expanded it, turning a modest cattle operation into one of the most respected ranches in the county. When he passed away, he left everything to me, along with one simple piece of advice. "Protect this land, son. Once you lose it, you never get it back." I took those words seriously. Every fence post, every pasture, every barn on the property represented decades of hard work. While most people spent their weekends relaxing, I spent mine repairing equipment, checking livestock, and maintaining the ranch. It wasn't always easy, but I loved the life. What made the ranch truly special wasn't the buildings or the land itself. It was the cattle. Over the years, I had built a successful breeding program that attracted buyers from several states. My reputation depended on the quality of my animals, and none of them were more important than Titan. Titan was a massive black bull weighing nearly 2,000 pounds. To strangers, he looked intimidating. His broad shoulders, powerful frame, and long horns made him look like something out of a Western movie. But to me, Titan was more than livestock. I had raised him since he was a calf. I knew his habits, his personality, and even his moods. Despite his size, he was usually calm and predictable. He followed routines, responded to familiar voices, and rarely caused trouble. Still, there was one thing everyone in the county understood. Titan was extremely protective of his territory. As long as people respected the fences and followed basic safety rules, there was never a problem. But anyone who ignored those rules was taking a serious risk. Most locals understood that. Unfortunately, not everyone did. A few years earlier, a large housing development had been built several miles away. What started as a small neighborhood quickly grew into hundreds of homes. Along with those homes came something else. An HOA. At first, I paid little attention to it. The neighborhood had its own rules, and my ranch sat completely outside its boundaries. Or at least, that's how things used to be. Everything changed the day a new HOA president took control and decided my ranch was going to become her next target. The new HOA president's name was Linda Parker. From the moment she took office, everyone in the neighborhood knew things were about to change. Linda wasn't interested in maintaining the community. She wanted to control it. Within weeks of becoming HOA president, she introduced new rules, stricter regulations, and endless inspections. Homeowners suddenly found themselves receiving warnings over things that had never been a problem before. Mailboxes had to match specific colors. Garden decorations were restricted. Even the height of people's grass became a source of conflict. Some residents quietly followed her demands. Others fought back. But Linda always seemed to get her way. She loved authority, and she loved reminding people that she was the one in charge. At first, her actions didn't concern me. The HOA wasn't my problem. My ranch sat well outside the community's legal boundaries. I paid my own taxes, maintained my own roads, and answered to county regulations, not neighborhood committees. For nearly a year, I barely heard her name. Then one afternoon, everything changed. I was repairing a fence near the front pasture when a luxury SUV pulled into my driveway. A woman stepped out wearing expensive sunglasses and carrying a clipboard. I immediately knew who she was. Linda Parker. She looked around the ranch with obvious disapproval. Her eyes moved from the barns to the cattle before finally settling on Titan, who was grazing peacefully in the distance. "What exactly is this place?" she asked. I laughed. "It's a ranch." Her expression didn't change. "That bull is enormous." "That's Titan," I replied proudly. Linda crossed her arms. "People in the neighborhood can see him from the main road." I wasn't sure what that had to do with anything. "So?" She frowned. "I don't think he creates the image our community is trying to project." For a moment, I thought she was joking. She wasn't. Linda spent the next 10 minutes criticizing everything she saw. The fences looked too rustic. The barns were old-fashioned. The cattle trailers weren't attractive. Even the ranch entrance apparently didn't meet her standards. The more she talked, the more ridiculous the conversation became. Finally, she pointed directly at Titan. "That animal is a problem," she said. I shook my head. "No, the animal isn't the problem." Her eyes narrowed. For the first time, I could see genuine anger behind her smile. That was the moment I realized something important. Linda Parker wasn't simply visiting my ranch. She was looking for a fight. And before long, she was going to find one. A week after Linda's unexpected visit, I thought the whole situation was behind me. I was wrong. Early one Tuesday morning, I heard a vehicle pull into my driveway. When I stepped outside, I saw the same luxury SUV parked near my barn. This time, Linda wasn't alone. 2 HOA board members stood beside her, both carrying folders filled with documents. The moment I saw them, I knew this wasn't a social visit. Linda walked toward me with the confidence of someone who believed she had already won. "Mr. Turner," she said, "we've completed our review." I raised an eyebrow. "Review of what?" "Your property." I almost laughed. "My property isn't part of your HOA." Linda ignored the comment and opened her folder. "We've received multiple concerns regarding your ranch. Residents have reported safety risks, excessive livestock activity, visual disturbances, and concerns about the bull." "The bull?" I repeated. "Yes. Titan." I glanced toward the pasture where Titan was calmly grazing. "He hasn't left that field in months." "That's not the point," Linda replied. "No, I think it is." One of the board members shifted uncomfortably while Linda continued reading from her paperwork. "As HOA President, I am formally requesting that the bull be removed from the area." For a second, I honestly thought I had misheard her. "Removed?" "Correct." I couldn't help but laugh. A deep, genuine laugh. The 2 board members looked embarrassed. Linda did not. "What exactly is funny?" she demanded. "The fact that you think you have authority over this ranch." Her smile vanished. Without saying another word, I walked into my office and returned with a thick folder containing property maps, tax records, and county documents. I handed them to her. "Read page 3. Linda flipped through the paperwork. Her confidence faded almost immediately. The county maps clearly showed that my ranch sat entirely outside the HOA boundaries. Not a single acre belonged to her community. The board members looked over her shoulder. One of them sighed. "Linda, he's right." For several seconds, nobody spoke. Finally, she closed the folder. "Boundaries can change." I stared at her. "No. Property law doesn't work that way." The board members exchanged worried looks. The conversation wasn't going the way Linda expected. Feeling her control slipping away, she took a step closer. "You should think carefully about cooperating. And you should think carefully about trespassing." Her face turned red. For the first time since arriving, she seemed genuinely angry. She grabbed the folder, turned toward her SUV, and motioned for the board members to follow. Before climbing into her vehicle, she stopped and looked back at me. "This isn't over, Mr. Turner." I watched her drive away in a cloud of dust. At the time, I thought she was simply embarrassed. What I didn't realize was that Linda Parker had just made the confrontation personal. And when people like Linda lose an argument, they don't usually walk away. They start looking for another way to win. Within days, the real war against my ranch would begin. Linda Parker kept her promise. The confrontation at my ranch might have ended with her driving away angry, but it was far from over. In fact, it was only the beginning. 3 days later, I received my first complaint. According to the letter, several HOA residents claimed that my cattle were creating excessive noise and disturbing the peace of the community. I stared at the paper in disbelief. Cattle making too much noise. It was one of the most ridiculous complaints I had ever seen. Still, I responded through the county office and provided evidence that my ranch was operating legally. The complaint was dismissed almost immediately. I figured that would be the end of it. Instead, another complaint arrived the following week. This time, someone claimed Titan was a dangerous animal that threatened nearby residents. The accusation was even more absurd than the first. Titan had never escaped his pasture. He had never injured a neighbor. He had never even approached the residential development. Once again, county officials investigated the claim. Once again, they found absolutely nothing wrong. But the complaints kept coming. One week it was noise. The next week it was odors. Then dust. Then traffic. Then accusations that my ranch equipment was lowering property values. Every claim pointed back to the same source. Linda. Although her name never appeared on the paperwork, it wasn't difficult to figure out who was behind it. She was determined to force me out through sheer harassment. Soon the attacks moved beyond official complaints. Rumors began spreading through the community. Neighbors who had never spoken to me suddenly believed I was running an unsafe operation. Social media posts appeared claiming Titan was aggressive and dangerous. Some residents even suggested that my ranch should be shut down completely. The stories became more outrageous with each passing week. Apparently Titan had charged vehicles. Apparently cattle were roaming free. Apparently my ranch was violating environmental regulations. None of it was true. Not a single word. Fortunately, facts were on my side. I kept records of everything. Every inspection report. Every permit. Every veterinary document. Every county approval. Whenever a complaint appeared, I responded with evidence. And every single time, the complaint was dismissed. That only made Linda angrier. The more she failed, the more aggressive she became. Then things started happening on the ranch itself. One morning I discovered a section of fence had been cut. A few days later, someone opened a gate and left it unsecured. Nothing serious happened, but the message was clear. Someone wanted trouble. That's when I installed additional security cameras across the property. At the time, I viewed it as a precaution. I had no idea those cameras would soon capture the most important evidence of the entire conflict. Because while I was busy defending my ranch from Linda's endless complaints, she was already working on something much bigger. Something far more dangerous. And for the first time since this feud began, her next move wouldn't involve paperwork. It would involve a plan to take Titan away permanently. Linda didn't waste any time after that day. If anything, the confrontation at my ranch only convinced her that she needed to escalate things further. What started as petty complaints and neighborhood rumors quickly turned into something far more calculated. Behind the scenes, she began organizing private meetings with a few select HOA board members. I didn't know it at the time, but later I would learn that those meetings were not about community concerns at all. They were about strategy, her strategy, to get rid of Titan once and for all. She claimed the bull was of liability risk and of public safety threat, even though there had never been a single incident involving him. She pushed the narrative harder each day, feeding fear into people who had never even stepped foot near my ranch. What she really wanted was authority. If she could label Titan as dangerous under HOA influence, she believed she could force county intervention, or at least pressure me into compliance. But the most dangerous part wasn't the paperwork. It was what came next. A few days later, I noticed unfamiliar vehicles slowly passing by the edge of my property. At first, I assumed they were just curious neighbors. But then I found something disturbing. One of my fence posts had been loosened again, and this time it looked intentional. That's when I activated all the security cameras across the ranch. The footage revealed what I had feared. Linda had been speaking directly with outside contractors, people I didn't recognize, near the edge of HOA territory. I couldn't hear the audio, but the body language said everything. Pointing. Planning. Agreeing. And then, one of the men gestured toward my ranch. Toward Titan's pasture. My stomach sank as I realized what she was doing. She wasn't just trying to complain me out of my property anymore. She was building a case to physically remove Titan. Not through law, but through force. The next clips showed even more disturbing behavior. One of the contractors was seen walking near my boundary fence late in the evening, checking locks and gates. Another vehicle circled the area slowly before stopping for several minutes, as if studying the layout. Every piece of footage pointed to preparation. A coordinated plan. A planned intervention. And Linda was at the center of it all. For the first time since this conflict began, I felt something shift in my mind. This was no longer about HOA rules or neighborhood disputes. This was a direct threat to my ranch, my livelihood, and Titan. So I backed up every file, copied every recording, and prepared for whatever she was planning next. Because one thing was clear now. Linda Parker wasn't going to stop. She was going to force her way onto my land. And when she did, everything would come down to that one moment. The morning it happened started like any other day on the ranch. The sun was barely up, casting a pale orange glow across the fields. Mist still hovered low over the grass, and everything felt quiet, almost peaceful. Titan was already in his pasture, moving slowly as he always did at dawn. But I couldn't shake the feeling in my gut. Something was off. I had checked the cameras twice before sunrise. Nothing unusual. No movement. No vehicles. No signs of anyone near the fence line. Still, I kept my eyes on the main gate while I went through my morning routine. That's when I heard it. Engines. Not one. Not two. Multiple vehicles. I stepped out of the barn and saw them immediately, 3 black trucks rolling through the front gate, kicking up dust across the driveway. My heart dropped. Linda Parker had returned. But this time, she wasn't alone. 2 SUVs followed behind her, and behind them came a truck full of contractors and equipment. Everything about it looked planned. Coordinated. Final. I walked quickly toward the entrance, anger rising in my chest. "What do you think you're doing on my property?" I shouted. Linda stepped out of the lead vehicle wearing the same calm expression as before, but now it felt colder. "Mr. Turner," she said, "we are here to execute an official removal order." I froze. "There is no such order," I replied immediately. She held up a folder. "Approved by the HOA Emergency Board." I laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. This ranch isn't under your HOA jurisdiction. One of the contractors shifted uncomfortably, but Linda didn't hesitate. We've classified the animal as a public safety risk, she continued. That gives us authority to intervene. I turned and pointed toward Titan's pasture. You're talking about that bull? The one that hasn't left his enclosure in years? Linda ignored me and signaled the workers forward. That's when I noticed Titan. He wasn't grazing. He was standing completely still. Watching. His head was lowered slightly, ears angled forward, every muscle in his massive frame tense and alert. He knew. I raised my voice again. Stop right there. You are making a huge mistake. One of the contractors actually hesitated. Ma'am, maybe we should wait for. No, Linda snapped. We are finishing this today. She began walking toward the fence. Step by step. Closer than she had ever come before. I moved quickly to intercept her. Linda, listen to me. That animal doesn't react well to strangers in his space. She stopped just short of the enclosure and smirked. Then maybe you shouldn't keep dangerous animals on private land. That was the moment everything shifted. Titan dug his front hoof into the ground. Once. Then again. The sound was deep. Heavy. Warning. The contractors noticed immediately. One of them backed up. Something's wrong with that bull, he muttered. Titan lowered his head further. His muscles tightened like a coiled spring. I felt my pulse spike. Everyone step away from the fence, I ordered loudly. Now. But Linda took one final step forward. And that was the trigger. Titan exploded forward. The ground shook as he charged the fence line, slamming into it with terrifying force. The metal rattled violently. The contractors scattered instantly, shouting and stumbling backward in panic. Linda tried to turn, but she was too close. Titan didn't break the fence, but he hit it with enough power to send a shockwave through the entire structure. The impact forced Linda backward off balance. She fell hard onto the dirt just inches from the enclosure. For a split second, everything went silent. Then chaos erupted. Workers screamed. Equipment dropped. Vehicles scrambled to reverse. I rushed forward, yelling at everyone to get back. Move! Get away from him! Titan stood over the fence line, breathing heavily, nostrils flaring, eyes locked on the intruders who had invaded his space. I ran to the control gate and triggered the internal lock system, trying to calm him from a distance. Slowly, Titan began to step back, but his warning was clear. This was his territory. And it had just been violated. When the dust finally settled, Linda was pulled back to her feet by one of the contractors, shaken and pale for the first time since this entire conflict began. She looked at me, breathing heavily, realization finally creeping into her expression. But it was too late. The damage was done. Because the cameras had recorded everything. And what she had just done was no longer a complaint or a dispute. It was something much worse. Something that would bring the entire HOA system crashing down. The moment the dust started settling, I could feel my pulse still hammering in my ears. Titan had stopped his full charge, but he hadn't fully calmed down either. He stood near the fence line, breathing hard, his massive chest rising and falling like a storm that hadn't fully passed yet. His eyes stayed locked on the group outside the enclosure. Not rage. Not uncontrolled aggression. Warning. Linda was being helped back to her feet by one of the contractors. Her face was pale now, the confidence completely gone. The woman who had walked onto my ranch like she owned it was suddenly looking at Titan like she had just realized what she had actually walked into. One of the contractors spoke quietly. "We told you to wait." Linda didn't respond. I stepped forward, keeping my voice steady but firm. Everyone needs to back away from the fence. Right now. This time, no one argued. They started moving backward slowly, carefully, like any sudden motion might trigger another charge. I could tell the contractors had finally understood what I had been warning them about from the beginning. Titan wasn't random. He was territorial. And they had crossed a line that animals like him never forget. Linda was still staring at the enclosure. I didn't think, she started, then stopped herself. But the truth hung in the air. She hadn't thought at all. I walked toward the control panel mounted near the barn and keyed in the override sequence. The internal gates inside Titan's pasture shifted, gently guiding him away from the front fencing area. It wasn't force, it was routine. Something he recognized. Slowly, Titan began to move back. One heavy step at a time. His breathing gradually slowed. The tension in his frame didn't disappear completely, but the immediate danger eased. Still, no one dared move closer. Not yet. A few minutes passed before the contractors began collecting their dropped equipment, glancing nervously between me and the bull. One of them kept shaking his head. "This is insane," he muttered. "We were never supposed to get this close." Linda finally spoke again, her voice lower now. "I was told this would be handled safely." I turned to her. "You were told wrong," I said flatly. For a moment, she looked like she wanted to argue, but nothing came out. Because now she understood something she hadn't understood before. Titan wasn't a threat that could be managed with paperwork, authority, or emergency HOA votes. He was an animal with instincts built into him long before any of them arrived. And they had ignored every warning I gave. I checked the cameras mounted along the fence line. The red recording lights were still blinking. Every angle. Every movement. Every second of what had just happened was being captured in perfect clarity. That changed everything. The contractors started to leave first, one by one, clearly wanting no part of what had just unfolded. Engines turned over. Dust began to rise again, but this time, it wasn't an arrival. It was an escape. Linda remained behind for a few seconds longer, standing near her vehicle. She looked back at Titan one last time. He was calm again now, standing in the distance, no longer charging, but still watching. And I could see it in her face. The realization that this wasn't over for her. Not legally. Not politically. Not anymore. Because what had just happened on my ranch would not stay contained behind my fences. It was going to spread. And when it did, Linda Parker would finally face something she had spent months trying to avoid. Consequences. By the next morning, my ranch no longer felt like a private piece of land. It felt like a case file waiting to be opened. The footage from the cameras had already been backed up and sent to my lawyer. Within hours, copies were requested by county officials, animal control, and even law enforcement. The incident that Linda Parker had tried to frame as a planned removal operation was quickly turning into something far more serious. An investigation. And not just into Titan, but into her. I sat in my office as officers walked the property line, carefully inspecting the fence damage, the gate logs, and every recorded angle from the security system. They didn't need me to explain much. The videos spoke louder than anything I could say. Linda arriving with multiple vehicles. Contractors entering private land without clear legal authorization. Repeated warnings being ignored. And most importantly, Titan reacting only after repeated intrusion and escalation. One of the investigators finally looked up from the tablet. "This doesn't look like an animal problem," he said. "This looks like an authority problem." That was the first crack. By midday, the county confirmed what I already knew: my ranch was fully outside HOA jurisdiction. There was no emergency order. No valid removal authorization. Nothing that justified what had been done that morning. Meanwhile, the contractors began giving statements. One by one, they admitted they had been instructed by Linda directly. Some said they were told the situation was routine. Others said they were pressured into believing the bull was already approved for removal. None of them said they felt safe. That detail mattered. Because it showed intent. And intent changed everything. By the end of the day, the HOA board had called an emergency internal meeting. I wasn't there, but I didn't need to be. Rumors traveled fast. Linda had overstepped legal boundaries, misused authority, and triggered a situation that could have ended far worse than it did. The footage had already gone beyond official channels. Neighbors were talking. Screenshots were circulating. And for the first time since this entire conflict began, the story wasn't being told by Linda. It was being told by evidence. As the sun set over the ranch, I stood near Titan's pasture. He was calm again, grazing quietly like nothing had happened. But everything had changed. Because now, it wasn't just about defending my land. It was about exposing what had been done on it. And Linda Parker's control over the situation was slipping faster than she could rebuild it. 2 days after the investigation began, the HOA held an emergency board meeting that Linda Parker could not control for the first time since she took power. The evidence was impossible to ignore. Security footage, contractor statements, county boundary maps, and official confirmation that no emergency order had ever been issued. Everything Linda had claimed fell apart in front of the board. By the end of the meeting, the decision was final. Linda Parker was removed as HOA President immediately. Her authority was revoked, and a formal report was forwarded to county officials for misuse of power and unlawful interference on private property. When I was notified, I didn't feel excitement. Just relief. Later that evening, one of the board members personally came to the ranch and apologized. Not just for Linda's actions, but for allowing things to escalate so far without question. As for Titan, no charges, no removal orders, and no restrictions followed. The county classified him exactly as he had always been, secure livestock on private land outside HOA control. When the dust finally settled, the ranch was quiet again. But this time, the silence felt different. It wasn't tension. It was peace. And somewhere out in the pasture, Titan stood under the evening sky, calm and steady once more, exactly where he had always belonged. That night, I stood at the edge of the pasture and watched Titan move slowly through the grass under the fading light. Everything that had happened over the past days replayed in my mind, the trucks, the arguments, the chaos, and the moment everything nearly got out of control. But here, in the quiet, it all felt distant now. The ranch was still mine. Titan was still safe. And the land my father had fought to preserve was still standing exactly as it should be. I leaned against the fence and took a slow breath. Some people think authority means control. But out here, control belongs to something far older than rules or titles. It belongs to respect. And anyone who forgets that eventually learns it the hard way.